Hi, this is Braden Holtby.
Hey, this is Tanner the Bulldozer Bozer.
Hi, this is Brian Burke from Toronto, Ontario.
This is Daryl Sutter.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carly Agro from Sportsnet Central.
This is Jay Onright.
This is Quick Dick coming to you from Tofnell, Saskatchewan.
Hey, everybody. My name is Theo Fleury.
This is Kelly Hrudey.
This is Corey Cross.
This is Wade Redden.
This is Jordan Tutu.
My name is Jim Pattison.
Hey, it's Ron McLean, Hockey Night in Canada and Rogers Hometown Hockey, and welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast.
I got to announce T-Bar 1's back in for 2021 too, so thanks to the boys over at T-Bar 1 Transport. For all your heavy haul needs, give T-Bar 1 a call today. Here is the tale of the tape. Originally from Edmonton, Alberta, he played for the Medicine Hat Tigers in his time in the WHL, was drafted in the 1980 NHL entry draft, 38th overall by the New York Islanders. His NHL career saw him suit up for the New York Islanders, the LA Kings, and the San Jose Sharks. In 1993, he helped backstop the LA Kings that featured the likes of Wayne Gretzky and company to a Stanley Cup Finals appearance against the Montreal Canadiens and Patrick Waugh. He played 15 seasons in the NHL, which saw 677 games, 271 wins, 3.43 goals against average. Now, you can find him as a broadcaster on Sportsnet and Hockey Night in Canada. I'm talking about Kelly Hrudey. The table's been set. On to the main course.
This is Kelly Hrudey, and you're listening to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast. Today I'm joined by Mr. Kelly Hrudey again. So first off, thanks for hopping on.
Of course. I enjoyed the last one. I think we went quite a long time. Was that in maybe May or June? And I think we went for a good hour and a half. So I'm looking forward to it again, Sean.
It was the last week of July, if you can believe it.
Oh, it was really, eh?
Yep. It was right before playoffs started.
So that would have been the week before our daughter, she got married here in the backyard. That was August 1st. I think I had a couple of days off. And then I would have then started on the Monday, August 3rd for the playoffs.
The first thing in my notes, Kelly, was to ask you about your daughter's wedding because that was the first thing we talked about.
Yeah.
And how yeah?
It was really great. My wife and our daughter, we had a wedding planner that was just amazing, and she did an amazing job also. And the three of them worked diligently leading up to that day, and the weather was perfect. My mom was able to come down, my brother and his family. I was very small. I think we had the limitations at that time were 50 people, and we had just under that. And we had it right in our backyard. We did social distancing. Everybody wore masks. We were diligent about that. In fact, the wedding planner and my wife came up with this detailed email about all the concerns we had with the pandemic and what we're expecting from everybody. And so all through then after the backyard, everybody came to the driveway. We had it tented, we had it catered and everything. It was just great. And we really did our utmost best at doing everything properly, though, because frankly, I think we may have talked about this last time, Sean. This pandemic has me worried, and more so now. And so back then, I was concerned about what we're doing properly, and even more so to this day.
Well, I just had a buddy actually get married this past weekend, and they had to be below, I think it was 30 guests, and okay. I was saying to him, there's only two ways you can really look at it. You can be depressed, you only had 30 guests, or you, for the rest of the time, you had a pandemic wedding, and who can really say that? A select few.
Yeah, and you know what? To that point too, that was the second wedding that we were at this summer under those same conditions where, I think our daughter was originally planning 120 people, and I think the other wedding maybe a little bit bigger, and became these two really small, intimate parties that I think may, over the course of time, change what a wedding might look like, because I found it to be really easy to visit with everybody. Like I said, it's very intimate. You had a chance to have a great conversation with all the people that were invited, as opposed to, and I know we've all been to larger weddings where it's hard to sit down and socialize and talk to people because there's so many people you have to say hi to or want to say hi to. So under these conditions, I thought it was great, and it might change weddings moving forward.
Yeah, you never know. I know I can only speak to my wedding, and we had just under 400 people there, and it was,
Holy.
yeah, let's just say, hey, half of Canada came down. I married a Minnesota girl, so we got married. I invited half of Canada. Half of Canada showed up, and it was a great night. I got no complaints, other than I probably didn't talk to half of them as much as I nearly should. And you're right, if you had, that 30, 40 guests, you get to actually sit down and chat with anyone or everyone. I can see where you're going.
Yeah, and costs are different. So for 400 people, I'm sure there's a lot of booze consumed and a lot of food, and there's a lot of sandwiches to make for the midnight lunch. So yeah, different circumstances, but it all worked out great for sure.
Now, the other thing that I had written down, I actually had 3 things written down from the last one. Not that they were the 3 things that stuck out. There were 3 things that you talked about, and then one you sprung on me right at the very end before I could even rebuttal what you were talking about. The second one was you said a new thing you started in the pandemic was you started calling your mother every day. Are you still doing that?
Absolutely. I think there were 3 days maybe during the playoffs in which I couldn't. Just scheduling got a little bit crazy and so on. I think it would have been days that I might have been in Toronto, because the last 18 nights of the playoffs, I was in Toronto and doing it out of the studio there. Prior to that, I'd been in my home studio. But you're right. And still to this day, I call her at any point from around now, which is 4 o'clock Mountain Time, to around 8 o'clock in that window. And we catch up, and, it's still so beautiful. I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, I know how important, Kelly, family is and your parents and everything. You talked so highly about them last time. It only seems fitting we start there.
I like it. And I don't know if I would have been able to share this news back then, but we're also going to be grandparents again. So not only do we have our little Maverick that's going to be 3 years old in February, but he's going to have a little brother. And so we're thrilled. And man, it's, we hope we get to see them in person, though, at some point here.
Well, congratulations. That's exciting news.
Yeah,
now,
it is really exciting.
The third thing that you dropped on me right at the end was you dropped. One of my favorite questions to ask is if you could sit down with somebody and pick between their brains, who would you take? And you said, actually, I've been pretty spoiled. I've got to sit down with 3 U.S. presidents, and you couldn't see my face at the time. My jaw kind of hit the floor. And I've since listened to a couple interviews of you, and I've picked out 2 of the 3 names, Bill Clinton being 1, George W. Bush being 2. Who was the 3rd? And could you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. So the 3rd was Mr. Bush's dad. So I did an event with a friend of mine, W. Brett Wilson, in Vancouver, and we were the hosts, the moderators. A person in Vancouver, he was hosting a dinner party for, I believe, only about 20 or 30 people. And it was a job of Brett and I to sort of get the conversation going. And that was amazing. And George W. Was phenomenal. He introduced me to his dad. And it was really cool because when you're around those people, in my experience, I didn't realize how humble they would be. And that's also for President Clinton. So all of them, I didn't have the same interaction with George W.'s dad. It was maybe a 5 or 10 minute conversation, whereas with Mr. Clinton and George W., I had real opportunity to sit with them and get to know them, and meet and greets with my family and so on. In fact, President Bush, George W., when I did an interview with him in Edmonton at the TELUS Convention Center, we sat down for 45 minutes before the event and just chatted, just he and I, and one of the organizers. Oh, by the way, how's this? Can you see this? If I do the light, right, there's a picture of us.
Oh yeah, right there
from the event, and also both President Clinton and George W. sent handwritten notes to us. And my mom, in fact, when I did Clinton in Kelowna, my mom was going through some health issues, so wrote her a beautiful note on her picture and told her about fighting and all that. It was amazing. And George W. Bush sent me this beautiful letter that I have framed in my office, and he talks about the love of our families and the daughters, and he has daughters as well. And so very cool. My takeaway though from it, Sean, is that when I was dealing with these people and their staff, I was worried or concerned about how they would treat me or what sort of time I would have with them. And they certainly could not have been more gracious. And that's not an overstatement. I'm not embellishing. I don't have to. The way in which they treated me and my family. And it was interesting to see the dynamics between the two presidents, Mr. Clinton and Mr. Bush, George W. And that when I submitted my list of questions to President Clinton for the event in Kelowna, we were doing it at the arena there. So I think there might've been 6,500 people. He did a speech for 45 minutes. And I did a Q&A with him for 30 minutes. They wanted me, his staff wanted me to submit the questions. And that was it. Like, they didn't edit them. They did nothing. It was just, okay, great. And the only advice they gave me is that they said the president doesn't like fluff. Like, don't ask him his favorite movie or what's the last book he read. Like, you've got to ask him real world questions. And so I was quite nervous, and leading up to it, I think I had jotted down 24 or 25 questions, which in a half hour would be unrealistic, but I didn't realize, or I didn't know how he was going to treat me. I didn't know if he was going to give me one-word answers so I only got to 5 questions, and it was phenomenal. I mean, and one of his last answers, now it's been quite a long time ago, I talked about his family, and he was raised by his grandparents, and something about, they had a rural grocery store, a convenience store, and something about how you treat others. And he said something about, but for that, Kelly, I take no credit. And I've used this line many times about my mom and dad and Donna's mom and dad. We were lucky, like Mr. Clinton said about his parents or his grandparents, that, that's how he is taught, to be nice and gracious and care about other people. And the same with President Bush. We just chatted for 45 minutes in Edmonton before, and I was amazed by how easygoing he was, and what a treat to deal with. By the way, they did, when I submitted my questions to George W. Bush, his staff, they asked me to change one word, and that's it in my questions. And it's just a phenomenal experience to have that interaction with those people. And I think it was really cool for me to sort of understand from both of them that even though they're different parties, that they still really care about each other and root for each other. And that's what one of my takeaways as well, also, because I know that the organizers of these two events that I did, they've had them in their post-presidency, and you can just tell the respect and admiration they have for each other. It's not about parties.
What was the one word?
I'm going to beg off that, and because I can hear my wife laughing, because times were different, and I don't know if I could get in trouble.
You're gonna hold us all. We're all gonna go to bed tonight going, what was the one word?
I can't. I wish I could share, and that might be. In fact, on one of the other interviews, you might have watched me with Greg Millen and John Bartlett from the booth, and there was a tiny bit of a segment in there that I thought I had shared too much, and I asked them to take it out. So
really.
Yeah, it's a strange thing, but I just think for the protection of everybody, I can't go down that road as much as I'd like to.
Kelly, when he's 85 years old, will have a memoir come out called "The Word Was."
Yeah, I might share that at some point, but
now
yeah, but
I know you're a guy who gets nervous. I think I've heard you talk a lot about you get nervous for everything, whether it was this, I think we talked maybe
Yeah.
even about it last time. It doesn't matter. What were
Yeah.
the nerves like before a president, or even a former president, I guess?
Ooh. Unlike anything I had ever experienced, it was interesting. My first experience with President Clinton, like I said, it was in the arena and we were meeting. There was a meet and greet. And so I had flown in my mom and dad, and I believe only two of my daughters could make it. And my in-laws, they all came. And so we had a meet and greet with Mr. Clinton. And then we're sort of milling about before we're going to go on stage, and there's a couple of interactions or little interviews at the beginning before, and we're just waiting backstage. And Mr. Clinton was so nice, because I think he could sense that I was nervous and I might have been rocking a little bit or something. And he said something like, "Kelly, we're going to go out there and have some fun." And he really put me at ease. And the one thing that nobody will know, and I'm sharing something that was really cool to me, is after the event, and we're walking off the stage, and there's these stairs going down, there's a little landing, then you turn and go down another set of stairs to kind of where the Zamboni entrance would be. And we get to that little landing, and Mr. Clinton was quite a ways behind me. So I was leading the charge down the stairs, and somehow he had up to me rather quickly, and he grabbed my arm nicely, gently, but a little bit of pressure, and he goes, "Kelly, how'd I do?" And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, President Clinton is asking me how he did on stage. I mean, if you've ever seen him, he's a world-class speaker, as you would expect, and extremely bright, and all these things. He knocked it out of the park, and it was really cool, because then he sort of, like I said, gently held my arm as we went down the stairs. We get to the landing, and I'd lost count of how many Secret Service there were around, and RCMP and so on. And we chatted for about 15 to 20 minutes. And the chief of staff came over to me after, and she said, "Wow, the president sure likes you." And I go, "Oh, well, how do you know that?" She said, "Because oftentimes after something like this, he just gets in his car and goes. And we know to back off if he engages the person." And so that was an opportunity for him to sort of share that he enjoyed the night. And he was, like I said, very gracious. I think he may have been flying onto Saskatoon or somewhere. He was on a big tour with a company called Tiny Public out of Calgary that does all these crazy, incredible speaking events. And so it was very, very nice. And geez, great memories. Thanks for bringing it up, because you sort of get spoiled a little bit, and you don't, sort of go back in those times and think, wow, what a special life, just for a guy growing up in Edmonton, and all of a sudden I had a chance to meet three former presidents and other people, and three prime ministers, and that's ridiculous, right?
Well, when it comes to pressure, having Kelly Hrudey on here brings its certain type of pressure. Now, I say that in the best sense. I mean that in the highest quality, and I just mean the levels of like where you're sitting and where I'm sitting, right? And for you to get nervous for a president, he's sitting like way, way up on the top of the mountain. Like,
Oh yeah.
I can just imagine Clinton or Bush. I put him in. It's maybe not the right way to frame it, but the same place as Gretzky. Anywhere they walk, everybody knows who they are.
Oh yeah.
And there's going to be nerves. So you can just imagine they've become very good at like, it's okay. We're going to have some fun here tonight, right? And just trying to relieve some of the nerves, because everywhere they go, anyone they talk to is going to have nerves. I mean, they're on a different planet, so to speak.
Well, and I think one of my things, whether it's fair or not, I was afraid that because I'm a former athlete, that they may not treat me with as much respect. I mean, they're around incredibly bright people every day of their lives, and that's why they've risen to those levels. But I think of my good friend Cassie Campbell Pascal. Recently, she did an event here in Calgary with Michelle Obama, and she says the same sort of thing. Now, the world's different, and I know that she has still been texting with Michelle on occasion, which is really, really cool. In my world, I think I can share this safely, that I think I've shared this before. Leading up to the event, I think I could tell people, but I wasn't able to send text messages for a month before. It was full on lockdown. I had been told by people that they're going to be monitoring my phone, all my internet and everything, to make sure that I wasn't sort of leaking details of the events prior to. So that was kind of cool in my mind. I thought, wow, that's interesting that the people that need to see my phone have the ability to look at it and make sure that I'm following all the proper protocols for everyone's safety. So that was interesting. And that was something that leading up to it, I remember thinking, hey, I'm going to send my buddy this text message. It has nothing to do with meeting the presidents or these conversations, but maybe I better not, because it might include a word or two that I might be afraid that gets out there. So it was kind of interesting.
Just to stick with the presidents for just one final second here. I wonder, the day you got the phone call or the day you got the text said, hey, Kelly, you want to interview some presidents?
Yes.
What, did your head hit the roof? Did you like, I assume you're like me, and that would be an exciting moment. And I feel like there might be a fist pump or two that goes down the road. I can safely say when I got Ron McLean, there was an email sent and it beeped on my phone while I was driving down the road, right? And I didn't pull over.
Right.
All I saw was Ron McLean. And I was like, oh man, that's going to eat at me. So pulled over, and then it says, he's going to come on. There was some fist pumps, and I'm sure people thought I was nuts. Now, you're talking about presidents of the United States. You're talking about prime ministers. When you found out something like that, you got a happy dance you do? You got a song you put on? Do you drink a glass of wine? What do you got for me?
No, I recall, again, it's that company called Tiny Public. The co-founders are Andy McCreath and Christian Derbyshire, and they're both Calgarians. And I had done some other speaking events for them, and basically is around the world of sports, and a couple of other people, business people, and I did these in Western Canada. And one I did was with Lance Armstrong in Saskatoon, and that was cool. But when Andy McCreath asked me if I'd be interested in doing President Clinton, I recall being excited, but my overriding thought, Sean, was, are you sure? And once again, I go back to my feelings about myself. I'm just a former athlete. I'm not in that world. I'm not up to date on the politics. I believe politics are important to me, but I don't share my politics. And I just didn't know how it would resonate. I'm happy to say that of course, I accepted, and they had to approve it. President Clinton and his staff had to approve it, and they did. And then I think my biggest takeaway after meeting the president and his staff and so on, I've had so many people come up to me since that event and share their thoughts, and they thought I did a great job. And I don't think they're being gratuitous, because you can usually tell when somebody's not truthful about something like that. So it was really cool to leave there, because I know there are a lot of Calgarians that were at the event in Kelowna. And so to have that feedback was real affirmation for me that I can do it. And then when I was offered the opportunity with President Bush, then at that point, I didn't say, are you sure? I readily accepted.
I find that very, very interesting. I remember telling myself, Kelly, and now I'm trying to compare myself to you, which is maybe a very poor thing to do. But I remember early on in the podcast stages, which it is still very early on.
Yeah.
But when I started, Wade Redden's from my hometown. Obviously, you can see the jersey on my shirt. Yeah. And I was a little bit nervous to take an interview like that, because I knew I wasn't ready, or at least I didn't think I was ready yet. Right. And it's funny what doing one of those will do for your confidence, especially when you don't absolutely comment, right? And I think it's funny that you worried that you weren't like essentially fit to sit across from a president, because you don't know the policies and everything. I find, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but I've found most people actually everyone, no matter how big or low they are just human beings, right? Like Bill Clinton, sure.
Yeah.
He probably gets asked about policy all the time, but he probably wants a good old fashioned question that isn't, what does section C and docket 8 stand for? And
Yeah.
can you break
Yeah.
that down for us? No different than all the hockey guys I get on, including yourself, right? Could we sit and talk about the Stanley Cup finals that happened in the upcoming season? And what do we think about the predictions? And it's like, yes, we could, but you're probably doing that, I don't know, 1,000 times in a week. And it's way more fun to talk about some human things and see where that goes. And some old stories for that matter.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. And I think that I'm sort of guessing here or speculating, but I think that's one of the reasons why I don't do social media as often as I maybe should. I was doing it a little bit early on in the pandemic. And in fact, I don't think I've posted a video in over a month. Well, I think Donna and I were in Vancouver about a month ago, and I may have posted something about our trip coming to an end. But and there's a reason for that. And I'm going to actually do a Twitter video and an Instagram coming up, and I'm going to share something about myself. But I need a little bit more time, and it's good news. But I think that one of the reasons why I think I have my own sort of little niche is that I don't talk hockey. We're having this great conversation, and I certainly don't mind talking hockey. It's just that I do it every Saturday night on Hockey Night, or I do it multiple times every week on a Flames broadcast. So if you want to hear what my thoughts are, they're right there. But when I talk on social media, I share, usually it's about the foods I'm going to eat, where Donna and I might be golfing, or where we might have gone on a vacation, and or most importantly, the topic of mental health. And so I think you get to see a different side of me that most likely I wouldn't have shared with people, 10 years ago. And I think that's what social media has allowed me to do, and show that this is really who I am. And, you might see me in a suit on a regular hockey broadcast, and that's cool, and I really love it. But you don't get to see me, really. Like, this is seeing you and I right here. This chat right now is sharing more about who you and I are, as opposed to what do you think about those retro jerseys coming out or whatever. I don't even know what they're called. I know there's
the reverse retros, and the LA Kings ones are absolutely awesome.
You know which one? And I have something coming up, so I had to look at them today. The Colorado Avalanche with the Nordique. I love that. Oh my gosh, that's gorgeous. And maybe it's because I have a warm spot for that city. And man, I used to love going to Quebec City and playing in that the old Colisée, and they had the best hot dogs, and just real special memories of going to that city in the cold winter nights, and we're flying in.
What makes a great hot dog? What put it over the top?
The buns. They had these really cool, unique buns, kind of like, I don't know, a rectangular shape, but they kind of look, I don't know, I won't do it, not rounded, kind of like the buns you buy at Safeway or anything. They had this unique shape, and they cut them off on the edges, and they toasted them lightly, and we had called them chechons. I don't know if that's the actual term in French for hot dog, but that's what hockey guys would call them. And you'd get in there, and because oftentimes you'd fly in the day before, and you'd practice in Quebec City. At least we did anyways when I played with LA. And we'd practice in the Colisée, and the concession would be open. So the day before a game, all of us would be lined up at the concession after a practice and having the hot dogs. And oh boy, amazing. And then we might go into Old Quebec and find a beautiful restaurant, and just go. I don't think I was ever there during the winter festival, but just a beautiful place.
Well, you bring up lots of lovely things. Quebec. I think all Canadians would love to see the Nordiques back in. There's something iconic about those jerseys, along with the Whalers, I might add.
Yeah, I love those ones.
But that's going back to the long form and getting to know Kelly Hrudey compared to the snippets you see on Hockey Night in Canada, where all you're there for is to put in, your 2 cents of opinion on the given topic and what's going on. Mm-hmm. I think this is a beautiful thing for all you guys, because you get to actually kind of know the person one-on-one.
Yeah.
One of the things I really wanted to discuss with you, we never got to last time, was your time in LA. I've read it in your book. I've seen it on YouTube several different times. I know you've talked about mental health. One of the things that I wanted to discuss with you was mental health, because it was I think it was 3 episodes ago, Kelly. I had a very good friend of mine, my first podcast guest, actually, Ken Rutherford, come on here. He's a successful business owner. He teaches. He's physically fit, a guy in about his mid 40s, and got 6 kids. Like, everything is rosy, great. And then he got in the podcast room, and we got talking. And here he opened up about his mental health, and you could tell. And it blew me away, because, I mean, I've known Ken for a long time, never seen anything,
Yeah.
not even a crack.
Yeah.
And out it came. And here he's got ADHD, and things are just bothering him, and COVID going on, and the pandemic, and it just adds and adds and adds. Here's a strong guy with like lots of love in his life. That's a guy who's got lots of love, and boom, all of a sudden there it is. And it was pretty cool of him to share it with me and to share it on this format. I think it did him a world of good. But I thought maybe it surprised the hell out. Like, when I say it surprised the hell out of me, I did not have an inkling it was coming. But you going in LA, I know I've heard you talk lots about your struggles, and Barry Melrose and Tony Robbins, and maybe lead the listener through kind of your, I don't know if it's struggle or your journey, whatever word you want to use for it.
Okay, so I'm glad we're talking about this, because that was the last chapter that Kirsty and I had written for the book, and I'll explain that in a second. But no, actually, I should share that first, and then I'll get to what I was going through. So we're writing the book, and we're at Kirsty's house. We're pretty darn happy with where everything was at, and I was like, this isn't quite right, because our daughter Caitlin had been sharing her story about her mental health issues for a lot of years, and we'd been doing a lot of public speaking, and yet here I'm trying to write a book and being as truthful as I can possibly be without being hurtful in a lot of cases, and yet I'm not sharing one of the things that I went through in life. And that was going back to that 92-93 season, when I don't know what was going on, and I don't think I had any mental health issues prior to that. But that summer, my brain was hyperactive. It was on fire. I believe I was entering my 10th year in the National Hockey League. I knew the numbers. The numbers would tell you that most players play in around 3.5 years. That's the average. And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can keep playing at this level. And my brain, and I've since been taught from Caitlin, the loop was going round and round and round, and it was only feeding me negative thoughts, and you can't keep doing it at this level, and you're done. And so I entered that season with those thoughts, but somehow I was able to sort of overcome them. We got off to a great start. Gretzky was injured that year to start. And even with Wayne's injury, we were either in first place in the league or first place in our conference. Like, we were all great. Luc Robitaille was on fire. Rob Blake, everybody were exceeding expectations. Even in late November, Sports Illustrated, which was unusual at the time, we were the cover feature on our team. Barry Melrose, I believe, was on the cover. They did a wonderful article about our team and the great job that Barry had been doing. He is young, good looking, charismatic, the perfect coach for the LA Kings in that environment, and so on. And I just remember going in around mid-November and thinking, whew, I just can't sustain this level. And we ended up we played in Toronto, and I think it was a Saturday night. We may have lost. My memory's not quite there right now today with that. Then we flew to Milwaukee. In fact, I think we stayed for the Grey Cup the next day. And then we flew to Milwaukee for one of those neutral site games. And I remember ordering up room service, just had like a Pepsi, and I couldn't barely eat. And my mind was just racing, and I was coming unglued. I mean, I was having an episode, I call it. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know why and what was happening specifically, but I knew that I was in tough shape, like really tough. And I got through the next day. In fact, I was first star of the next game. We beat Chicago. We flew home. I held it together again for a couple of more games, and we played at home against Montreal. I think we tied 5-5, and Barry comes into the dressing room and he's talking to the team. And I recall specifically, he gets to me and he goes, and even Kelly can play better. And I'm thinking to myself, no, I can't. And there was another word in there, and I think you can figure out which word it is. And it's a pretty strong swear word in our language. And I said, no, I was convinced. My brain that night clicked off. It was like, you're done. You can't play at that level. And I went in a ditch for about 2 months. It was awful. Gosh, it was awful. I hated it. And the good news is, though, you and we can have these conversations now. And as men, we're not ashamed anymore, right? It's okay. So I'm really good with this conversation because it helps people. And, when it's a little bit different, but I got to tell you, bud, when I was in Toronto for the playoffs and with the pandemic, I couldn't take it. Like I had to meet a couple of my bosses. Okay, so the last weekend, there's a game Friday and Saturday, and then ultimately the cup was awarded to Tampa on Monday. But Friday and Saturday, I did myself no favors because the pandemic, that was really bothering me. And I like to go for a walk in those days normally. And I stayed in my hotel room and I watched the news. And I went basically into a ditch like I did in Milwaukee. And I could barely leave my hotel room. And I met a couple of my bosses, and even Elliot Friedman happened to be there at the time. And I said, I don't know if I can go to air. Like, it was just bothering me so much. I just wanted to go home. And I got through Friday somehow. And then Saturday I was in worse shape. And luckily for me, we have such good support. We have one of my bosses, Joel Darling. I had Brian Spear, one of my producers, and they were really looking after me. And after the Saturday show, Joel came into my dressing room and said, "You okay? Do you want to go home?" And I thought, wow, that's beautiful. And I thought, no, I think I'm okay. I need to clear my mind. So on Sunday, it was a beautiful day. It was a day off. I went for a 3.5-hour walk, and I got my head together a little bit. I kind of used some of the tools that I've learned from Caitlin and so on about what we're going through. And I was like, no, I can do it. I was very thankful that Tampa finished them off on Monday, because I was in just such a bad place mentally. And that's beautiful that we're talking about it, Sean, because, I'm not the only guy that's had troubles, and I'm here soon to be 60 years old. And if I can tell my story and be emotional, there's other guys my age going through the same thing, and talk about it, because it's impossible to do it alone. I tell you, I did that when I was in Milwaukee, and for a while there where I didn't share anything with anybody. And my wife knew, she knew that I was going through something really bad, but I didn't share enough with her. And so I'm happy to say that it's our greatest work, my family's greatest work. It's not anything to do with my playing on the ice or my broadcasting career. It clearly is the message that we continue to share with others about mental health, because I know I'm really rambling here, but the Canadian Mental Health Association will tell you 1 in 5 people suffer. And I'm here to tell you, maybe that's completely debilitating to those people, but 4 in 5 suffer, or maybe 5 in 5 in some way. We all have something, I believe, to a certain degree.
Well, I think, appreciate you sharing. And I don't think anyone, especially men, should ever feel bad about being emotional about anything.
Well, I'm the kind of guy that cries at a wedding too, so you get the full gamut with me.
Listen,
Happy or sad.
listen, my wife will tell you full on. If I watch a movie that's got a little bit of a emotional heartstring,
Oh
you'll
my
hear
gosh.
I'll be wiping. Anyways, that's
Oh,
a
same.
side story.
Oh
But
yeah.
I appreciate you telling. It's funny. It's funny, Kelly. When we talk about things like this, and for me being a younger guy and hearing you say, I didn't have any symptoms before. It wasn't like, like I've been dealing with it all my life. Just one day in the middle of a 10-year career, which anyone and their dog would
Yeah.
go, man, you're on the top of your game. Like, way you go, get moving, right? And it can happen to you. And not only just happen to you, like, I think what is wonderful about how you tell the story is, and I understand that I'm dragging it back up for you, and I really do apologize
No, I'm good.
for that.
I'm good.
But it's good for people to hear that they're not. I think one of the worst things that the COVID and the lockdowns and everything's brought on is the connections have disappeared, and a lot of that is starting to stir up some really tough things for people that is hard to share. All right, and
Yeah.
one of the things that Ken had talked about, and I hate to bring Ken up 6 times, he'll probably come swap me,
good.
but he said, he felt bad for sharing it because he thought, it'd make him less of a man to show weakness, right? And I'm like, man, you got to get that stuff out of your head, right? Like, you
Yeah.
got to tell somebody, because by getting it off your shoulders, then you can get the help you need, right? And you can start talking about it and address it for what it is. It was Theo Fleury on a side note. No, I'm going on a tangent, but on a side note, Theo Fleury, when he was on, we talked a little bit about went on with him and Graham James.
Yeah.
And there were people extremely close to me and from around the area that were coming up and talking to me about when they were kids growing up, things that had happened to them. And I was like, geez, now I feel like a freaking lucky kid that never happened, right? Like,
Right.
it's more commonplace. That which is on a side note, is more commonplace. And I think bringing it back to mental health, I think it was more commonplace, like you're saying, before the pandemic. But now with the pandemic going on and people being isolated, I mean, there's a lot of anger, hockey being shut down again. I've said this time and time again. I was getting a little bit tired of sports and like hearing about the Oilers and McDavid and whether he's good or not. It's like, smack my head off the table. But now I'm just like, I will never complain about that ever again. Again. Because those things, as a society, I didn't realize how much we needed, but we need them.
Yeah.
And we need them back soon.
We do, and it's good for us mentally to sort of escape what we're going through and what we're feeling. But with your friend Ken, you should remind him, and it's one of my favorite lines from my good friend Michael Landsberg about sick, not weak. And it's a real good message to send to men, women, boys, girls, that you're not weak. You're dealing with something. And so I'd like to share a story here about mental health and how the world is changing. So certainly 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been having this conversation. And I think it's about 3 years ago, a friend of mine, Brett Wilson here in Calgary, he has this really small golf tournament out at Copper Point in Invermere. And it's 24 of us that go. And it's in support of mental health causes. And so we golf. We're having a dinner. We're sharing stories. And you know what we're all talking about? Mental health and how it affected all of us. Can you imagine? Years ago, 24 guys just talking at a dinner table about what we're feeling and how we're dealing with things and what we're going through. I mean, it's a favorite night of mine, and I couldn't make it this year because I was working, but they were getting together. So I called him, and Brett Kissel also goes, and the three of us had a nice chat about the night and saying we love each other and all this. I mean, I just think it's fantastic that we're, opening up more, not just with our families, but, it's a good thing to tell another person, hey, I love you. It's good.
Well, it's once again, one of the things the pandemic is that human interaction, right? Like human interaction. I don't mean like, hey, how's it going? I mean, that's okay too. But An actual hug, a handshake, a time to dig into something, to have a conversation. I said this with Ken. One of the things I realized really early on, once the pandemic started to lock everything down, is I'm a guy who thrives on having conversation. I enjoy getting things out of my brain. One of the best ways I learn is by talking with somebody. So my wife some days I'm sure wants to swap me because I'll literally word vomit at times just over, and then it gets out, and then you can be like, oh, that didn't really make sense, and away you go, right? So what I did with the podcast is I went from doing 1 a week to upwards of 4 a week, right? Like I just screw it. Let's just start talking to people and let's see where it goes, right? And so I just think there's a ton of, as much as I think I'm unique, there's so many people that enjoy conversations. And as we start to limit the ways we can do that, we just have to find new ways. And this is one of the ways. I mean, it's easy to Skype call somebody or what have you to get those in. And it's really good for man, I hate to sound corny, but it's good for the soul to talk to somebody and to talk about something more than just, hey, the sun came up today. But maybe that's
100%. I mean, I think I may have told you this when we spoke in late July that because of the pandemic, and one of the things that I really enjoyed through the time and now I'm re-engaging is I never said no to anybody. Whenever anybody asked me across the country, I accepted their invite, and it was awesome. I mean, I've lost count of how many podcasts or Zoom things or Instagram meetings, all those sorts of things that I've taken a part of, and I just really love it. And it's great. I have another one tomorrow, and looking forward to that, and just everything about it. So it's connecting us in different ways, right? And so I always felt kind of like disconnected when I became so busy with Hockey Night and Flames broadcast, because I couldn't do things like this. And, I was always running to the airport or checking into a different hotel in a different city and worrying about the broadcast the next night or doing something. And so this has been good for me to sort of share who I am and what I like to do. And it's been really great.
Well, once again, I really do appreciate you sharing. Now, I want to change topics because
all right.
When you go into the NHL, your first year, everybody's, I believe, I shouldn't say everybody, but I'm quite sure they put you in a house to kind of be, shall we say, mentored, or to have kind of like a guide for what the 18-year-old coming up into the NHL. And I know you did it for Patrick Marleau. I was just curious about that experience. And if you, when you were a young goalie in New York, if you had somebody you went and lived with and kind of learned from, because I've talked to you last time about the culture of the Islanders, but did you actually live under somebody and kind of just get eased into it?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I think, if I remember correctly, that it was, and even when we brought in Patrick Marleau to our house, he was quite a bit younger. So I had already been living on my own for 2 years. Well, I had a roommate in Indianapolis, Monty Trache, Brian's younger brother. So I had lived on my own for 2 years. So the idea of maybe moving into a family wasn't top of mind for me. I was more interested in maybe finding my own place without a roommate and just sort of learning life at 22 years old. And so nobody offered. But having said that, they were amazing mentors to me, all of them. Every single player on the Islanders, I felt a real connection to. And I was the only rookie to make the team out of training camp. And I stayed in the hotel for 3 months. So we had 3 goalies, Billy, Rolly Melanson, and myself. And so I think the team was kind of unsure in which direction they were going to go. I think it was pretty clear that somebody was going to get moved, and it wasn't going to be Billy Smith. And so finally, when the decision was made, and I think Rolly would have been traded, then they said I could move into a place. I moved into a place by myself. And then, in fact, it was kind of a spooky old place. It was in a place called Seacliff. If you ever want to Google it, it was like an old sea captain's house. It was beautiful. It overlooked the Long Island Sound, had a really spooky basement, and it was a big old grand house. It was gorgeous. But living there by myself was spooky enough. And so when Gord Deneen was called up, I asked him to come in and room with me. And so that was kind of nice. And then oftentimes my fiance, Donna, who of course I'm still married to, she would come down on occasion. But that house scared the pants off of her too. But we didn't, to get to your point, I had lots of mentors, but moving out on my own was important. And I thought at that age, it was something I needed to do to, really learn how to take care of myself.
Now, just sticking with spooky for a second, did anything spooky ever happen, or it was just a spooky house?
It was just a spooky house. It had the weirdest spooky basement. I would never, if you wanted to think of the scariest basement in a horror movie, we should just take you to that house in Seacliff, and you could grasp what I'm thinking. There was this kind of like, it was dark and small, and then they had this cinder block wall that kind of divided the basement, and you couldn't see over the other side. I don't know why.
Didn't you tour this place and be like, maybe not this place?
Well, it was, I got a good deal on it because
why.
Mike McEwen was a defenseman on that team, and he got traded to LA. So I sublet it from him. And so he was looking for somebody to take over the rent until he was going to come back in the summer. So I did that for him. But I just, I went and looked at the house, but I looked at the main floor and the upper floor, and it probably didn't occur to me at that age to go check out the spooky basement. But man alive, it was a great part of Long Island, though. I mean, Long Island, if you've ever been, it's beautiful and lush.
Is Donna still sitting beside you?
She's doing a puzzle just out in the next room.
I want to know what Donna's thoughts are of this house.
Oh, she shared them with me a lot. Was it spooky, Donna? Oh, here she goes.
I'm not going to go on.
She doesn't.
Come on, Donna. You can come on. Let's have her. Let's have it here, Donna. I want to know how spooky this place was.
It was super spooky. And when Kelly would go on the road, when I would come down to visit, I would ask some of the other girls on the team, girlfriends, like we used to do sleepovers at each other's house because none of us had kids and whatever. No one would sleep at that house. Second story is you'd go down these crickety old wood stairs, but it was like those ones where they could grab you from, in between. There was nothing. So I'd fly down the stairs, and the washer and dryer were against the one wall. So you can imagine. And then there was that half cinder block. It was probably about 6.5 feet high, but then there was still about 1.5 feet of just black. You didn't know what was on the other side. So you'd have to watch be looking at the washing machine, but also at this wall, because I thought for sure something was coming over that wall. And there was lots of sounds in there, though.
Yeah, there were a lot of sounds.
There was always sounds at night and stuff. I remember I would leave the radio on it sometimes when he wasn't there because I don't even know why we stayed there.
But it was interesting. So how people like to take care of you, like Donna said, none of the girls would want to sleep over, but we got to know this Nassau County policeman. Yes. And when he was on duty at night, when he knew I was out of town, he would often come and park in the driveway and just sit there and do his notes and his paperwork and so on. So I know it made Donna feel a whole lot better that this Nassau County cop had her back in that sense.
I can't believe Donna couldn't convince you to sell that place like immediately.
Well, we ended up living there. They had a little tiny apartment attached to the place, and we got married that summer, and then we ended up staying in the tiny little apartment just for a few months till we found a place the next season. But that little apartment was not spooky.
No,
that basement was spooky. All
good horror stories are built off of a spooky basement or attic.
Yeah.
There's no going around it.
And the Amityville Horror is a town on Long Island.
No, it is not. Is it really?
Oh, yeah. Amityville is a town on the south shore of Long Island, which I suspect would be 45 minutes away, ballpark, from where we were living in that little place called Seacliff.
We were just having a conversation like 2-3 weeks ago about the scariest movie you've maybe ever watched. And Amityville Horror is right at the top of the bloody list for me. That was the entire time you watch any scary movie, you're yelling at them like, why are you still there? Just go. And at the end of
Okay.
Amityville Horror, they leave.
Hang on, Don. That's a scary movie, and it really scared the pants off me when I was younger. But what's that movie?
Sinister.
Oh, have you ever watched a movie called Sinister?
Yes.
That one got me, and that's not long ago. That's what, 7-8 years ago. That spooked me for days, maybe weeks. Like seriously, everybody would go up to bed, and I'd go get a glass of wine, and I'd look out the kitchen window into the backyard, and I'd think I'd see something looking back at me. I was a mess. That had nothing to do with my mental health issues. That movie just scared the pants off me. I've never watched, because I think there's another one, isn't there? A Sinister 2 or something? And I never did watch it. I just couldn't.
Oh, you gotta love a good scary movie. I don't do that to myself very often anymore. I gotta be honest. I don't know why I keep watching these. I mean, I can't sleep properly at night after I do it, but every once in a while you need a good scare.
Well, and you know what we love, like, I think we chatted about this before, you know, what you find on Netflix. So Don and I last night just finished up Queen of the South. And so we went on a full on binge, a couple of weeks for sure. We saw it. We watched every season, 4 seasons in like 2 weeks. And so we just finished up last night, and yeah, it's a great program. And, you know, there's so many good things out there. And every single night, you know, we're not going out for dinner anymore. And every single night around 6:30 or so, we get ready for dinner and get in our favorite comfy chairs and watch something. And it's been awesome.
Netflix and chill, eh?
Right? We won't go down that road, my friend.
Going back to Patrick Marleau, was he the first guy or the only guy you guys ever did that with? Or did you do it quite?
It was, you know, it was different in LA because, first of all, when we were living down in LA, we were in the beach area, and there weren't a lot of guys at that time living in the beach. There were a lot of guys in the valley. What's that? Yeah, so we were one of the first families, I believe. Jim Fox had been down at the beach, but there weren't many people. Marty McSorley, but he was single. He was living down at the beach, but we were one of the first families, I think, to move by the beach. And so it wasn't like really great for commuting and getting together. And so the thought of having, and by the way, our kids were extremely young at that point. So having somebody, and we didn't have a room for anybody. So having somebody come live with us wasn't really on the agenda. But like I said, when we're finishing up in San Jose, it just seemed perfect. We had a nice little bungalow with a swimming pool, and a part of that house, we had like a guest house. And so it made perfect sense if we were going to do this at the time that Patrick would live with us. He'd live in the guest house. And of course, he spent almost no time in the guest house other than to sleep. He spent all the time in our house with our family. And like I've always said, he's like a big brother to our daughters. And so that was just a beautiful experience. I think I shared with you one of my favorite things with Patrick. After a home game, would come back, and there weren't many restaurants available back then in San Jose to go grab a bite to eat after the game. So we'd come back to the house and have Donna would make sandwiches and would sit up and just reminisce about growing up and family and so on. Pat's mom and dad would come down every once in a while and would drink a little bit of cognac, and everything about it was just a real good way to bond and get to know somebody. And Patrick and I still text every once in a while, and it's really cool.
Well, I just think it's for a young kid to be thrown into the world of professional sports, big money, media, like everything. I think it's a cool way of going about it, kind of to like shelter him a little bit, and then
Yeah,
not only that, to have a guy who's had a career like yourself to be just to bounce it off of, right? Like, and you can just kind of like, no, that's okay, don't worry about that, or do worry about this, or be here at this time, and kind of give him the lay of the land instead of just like throwing him to the wolves, so to speak.
100% about that. It is sort of like one of the things that we had thought about is that I want Pat to see sort of, how it takes to get ready for a game, the preparation. Although you're hoping to have a ton of fun while you're playing sports, there's a real business side to it, and you've got to really appreciate that and respect that. And with that comes responsibility. And so I really took that part of it seriously. Having said that, we showed Pat fun. I don't mind sharing this story because I don't think I shared you the story with Patrick, our last dinner together in San Jose. Did I last time?
No, I don't think so.
All right. So Donna and I take Pat out for a fantastic Italian dinner at this great place in downtown San Jose. And we're sort of, he's thanking us for the season, and we're thanking him for sort of, in my case, rejuvenating my spirit and love for the game, because it was sort of waning in my second last year. And Pat did a really nice job of getting that enthusiasm back for me. And we're sharing, and I knew what I had made in my NHL career, and I'm looking at how salaries are going. And I, near the end of dinner, I go, Pat, I'm looking at salaries, and I'm thinking, by the end of your career, I think you're going to make between $50 and $60 million. And Pat's a pretty quiet guy, and he gets this really neat grin on his face. And he's kind of thinking to himself, I could tell, and kind of putting words in his mouth. He's thinking, man alive, I grew up in a place called Aneroid, Saskatchewan, and somehow through the game of hockey, Kelly thinks I'm going to make between 50 and 60 mil. So a number of years ago, I think it was about the year 2013 or 14, I'm doing a Sharks Kings playoff game. I'm doing color. After game one, there's a day off. And so I go to the Sharks practice, and I asked to meet Patrick after. And I had a real serious look on my face. And I go, hey, Pat, I think I owe you an apology. And he looks at me and with a really concerned look on his face as well. And I go, remember that night we had dinner and I said, I think you're going to make between 50 and 60 mil. He goes, yeah. I go, I'm sorry. I cut you down by about half. I didn't realize you'd make about 100 or more. And so we had a nice little chat, but and that's the point of my story kind of is that, but yet Pat's the same guy, right? He's the same guy that I grew up. He, of course, is different because he's got a family and all that, but same kid, never egotistical, just a really nice kid that happened to do really well for himself.
When he was living with you, Kelly, did you know he was going to have the career he's had? I mean, you can't see that he was going to have the longevity per se.
Right.
But Patrick Marleau is like, I don't know, man. He's had one hell of a career. And to stick with San Jose for, what was it? Was it 18 years?
Yeah. Maybe
19 years?
Yeah, something like that. And, okay, one thing that none of us could ever predict or know, that the genetics that he has, that, a big part of his longevity is just genetics, right? I mean, how many people can play that long in any professional sport and not have any significant injuries? I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to be wrong here, but I think 1 year he missed 20 games. That's it. Like, he is just blessed with a great body that can handle the wear and tear. There's less than 1% of the people that can do that. So he has that going for him. Now, two things stand out in terms of just play. So what I noticed about Pat early on in training camp, he had an incredible release. So it wasn't a typical release of the shot where he had to load up. He rarely ever took a slap shot back then. And what he would do is how he'd accept the pass, and all in the same motion while he's accepting the pass, the stick blade would just go back a few inches, and quickly he would make the transformation into moving forward and then releasing that shot all in one motion. It was beautiful. Back, forward, all back, forward, incredible. And then secondly, I remember early in training camp, we're doing some skating drills, and my good buddy Tony Granato, one of the best guys I've ever met in the game, by the way, I'm standing beside Tony in a drill, and he's huffing and puffing, and he had just did a drill with Pat Marleau, and he looks at me and goes, Kelly, I can't believe that kid. I cannot keep up to him. And Tony was a great skater. He was a great pro, played, 15, 20 years himself. And I thought, holy, when Tony tells me right there that he can't barely keep up to the kid, or he can't. And that sort of to me was, because Pat looks effortless when he's skating, right? I don't know if people actually can appreciate how great a skater he is or how fast, because he looks effortless. Like, it's perfect. Everything about his stride and his strength and his core and everything, it perfectly melds together. And so some of us, skating, or other guys, you look a little bit choppier, but not Patrick. And then lastly, he was always about learning. So his first year with the Toronto Maple Leafs, the people at Hockey Night asked me to fly to Toronto a couple days before the start of the regular season and do a sit down one-on-one with Pat. In fact, you can find it on YouTube somewhere. And we sat down, and one of the questions I asked him about why Toronto, and he said because he loved watching them. It would have been an early game when they're playing in San Jose. So watch the Leafs at 4 or 5 o'clock California time. And one of the players that he loved to watch was Mitch Marner. And I asked him why. And he said his skating, but not conventional skating. It's all about his edge work. And that's what Patrick says in the interview. It's all about his edges. And he tried to incorporate some of that. I don't know if he can because of his age, and it's all edge work for all these young players now. You look at Marner, and there's many others that it's just phenomenal how they skate differently than how we were taught. It's really cool.
Oh, well, you pretty much summed it up there, right? I mean, he had the shot, he had the skating, and then he gets the longevity because he's kind of a freak athlete, is what you're getting at.
Yes.
Now, we just passed the hour mark. How much time do I got you for? Because this is exactly what happened last time. Do I got you for 15 more minutes? 2 minutes? You tell me.
Let's go 10.
10. Okay. So what we're going to do then is we're going to slide into the final 5. Okay.
Yeah.
I got some fun ones for you today. I've been thinking about this for a while. So our Crude Master final 5, 5 quick questions, Kelly. Shout out to Heath and Tracy McDonald, supporters of the podcast since the very beginning. Uno Mas, the first one, the best prankster you ever had while playing in the NHL or in the minors.
I have to use 2 names. Tom Laidlaw when I played in LA, and Barry Beck as well. Barry Beck was this big, guy, 6'5", and built like a rock, and yet he had this really funny, gentle side to him, which I don't think many people knew at the time. Barry would do goofy things, like we'd go into the airport, because back then oftentimes we were flying commercial. We weren't even taking charter planes at that point. And the old trick, right? You tie a fishing line, you'd make a little hole in a dollar bill, you put the fishing line through, you'd throw it out in the middle of the corridor. And it was hilarious to watch grown men in business suits chasing. You'd reel it in, right? So they're chasing a $1 bill, and the reaction, I'd sit right by Barry and just laugh my face off watching these men chasing the dollar bill down the corridor in the airport. Now, the reactions would be different. Some guys would find out that it's a trick and they'd laugh their face off. Other guys would get super mad. Now, Barry had this one really good rule that I liked, that if a child started to chase the bill, it was theirs, right? Like, he wouldn't reel it along anymore. It was for the child to take. And I thought that was pretty good of Barry.
Yeah, that's a good rule. That's a good rule. All right, Mr. Tunes, if you and Donna tomorrow, everything opens up. You can see anyone in concert. What concert you going to?
Holy. Yeah. Well, we've seen Springsteen and the Eagles many, many times, and I would probably lean towards that again. I would love, Donna might have somebody different. I would love to see Springsteen in an acoustic setting again, kind of like what he did on Broadway. I've watched that show many times, and he talks about mental health in those shows too. So that would be the guy for me. And there are other artists that I absolutely love and respect, but going back to my days as Tunes, Springsteen, or Don Henley's a favorite voice of mine also.
Little dirty laundry.
You? All right.
Oh, dad impressed upon me, Don Henley. So we've listened to a lot of that. You know what? I've been playing a lot. So when the kids have bath time, I always bring the speaker in and we always play a little bit of music. And I've been loving on a good old Saskatchewan boy, Colter Wall. He's got that
Isn't that
old
Brett Wall's son?
Yeah, and he sounds like Johnny Cash. I'm pretty sure he doesn't like that comparison, but there's no other comparison. Like, it is damn right impressive.
Okay, so I hope my friend Brett Kissel doesn't take offense to this, because I'm going to share a story that he shared with Brett Wilson and I at the golf tournament number 2-3 years ago. Brett Wilson may have asked Brett, because they're kind of partners together in building up Brett Kissel's career. And he said to Brett, he goes, "Who's a big up and coming Canadian artist?" And Kissel said it was Brad Wall's son. What's Colton?
Colter.
And that was the guy he picked out. And I always remember that conversation, because he's like, this guy is unbelievable. Now, he didn't tell me what kind of, voice he had, or the style he had, but I always remember that conversation. Like, that's cool.
Let me do you a favor. You and Donna a favor tonight. My wife doesn't care about Colter Wall, so sorry, Colter, you can't win them all over. But if you haven't watched, go to YouTube and just Google Colter Wall and click on a couple of his videos and watch him sing. It'll blow you. It'll blow you away. I promise you're gonna. 10 minutes after this is done and you're down the rabbit hole of Colter Wall, you're gonna text me and go, "Yeah, you were right." Like, it's freaking impressive. Oh yeah. That guy can do do my entrance music any time of the week. Like, it's unbelievable.
So I love this conversation, because you and I both like music, and I've learned so much from people like Brett Kissel. So he does these things at the golf tournament where he just plays acoustically for all of us, and he tells a story behind the song or the writing, and he shared with us, which I didn't know. He credits Glenn Campbell for changing the face of country music because of how he played the chords, and Brett could tell you a million times better than I can. I just know what music I like, but I don't know how it overlaps and you do all these different transitions and so on. But he went through the whole thing, and I think most of us were like this, because how he explained it to us, very simple chords, before that, and then Glenn Campbell came along and changed everything. And that was really cool to hear. I think maybe one of the reasons why I love the story so much, because I like people that know the history of their craft. So it really disappointed me a number of years ago when Jean Beliveau passed away, and there are a lot of young NHL players that had never heard of him, and that bothers me. Because I think if you're going to earn a little bit of dough doing something, you should know a little bit about the history of it. I'm not saying you should know who Kelly Hrudey is, or some of the guys I played with, the unremarkable people, but the ones that really left a mark. And that's why, again, going to Brett Kissel, when he really studied his craft and the history of it and went through the timeline about it, that really grabbed my attention. I was like, yeah, here's not just some young dude trying to make some dough because he's talented. He knows about this industry. I liked it.
I interviewed Brendan Gallagher, and he told a fantastic Jean Beliveau story when he passed.
Right.
And he knew, and it was all about the lore of playing in Montreal. It was very cool. Very, very cool.
So every single game that I played in Montreal, I would try and get a chance to get a look at Mr. Beliveau, and his wife was usually there. They sat in the same seats. He looked so beautiful and regal. His hair was always nice. He had the nicest suits, and he just looked to me like hockey royalty. And I would always take a glance over. In fact, that was one of the most important things I did before Game 1 in the '93 Stanley Cup Finals. While I was walking out of the dressing room, I hesitated before stepping onto the ice. And I looked around. I wanted to make sure I experienced the whole thing. And I looked over at Mr. Beliveau, and that was really moving. That was cool. I was very emotional. I remember getting like a jolt of energy right through my body at that point.
just on a side note to that, it doesn't happen all the time because it's hard to do, but when you can recognize a moment for what it truly is
Yeah.
and recognize that's a special talent, or just special that you can just recognize it for what it is. So I that's a cool story.
Well, it was like the first time I was ever on Hockey Night in Canada, because, you know, I had experienced the NHL life. I think I was finishing my 11th year. And so I knew about the NHL life and the NHL experience, but to sit in that chair right beside Ron McLean and have that music pumping into your ear, that was golden. That was magical. I'll never again experience that in the same way. And I've never forgotten it as well.
Yeah, those I was saying I do archive Lloydminster archive interviews. Couldn't spit that word out. So I sit down with people who are, you know, between 60 and I would say the oldest has probably been 95, something like that. And get to sit down and drink in, so to speak, their story, right? Really get to just listen to their life and what they've been through and that kind of thing. And one guy walked in, had no idea what he was about to sit down and do. And I said, "Oh, what a lovely treat you're in for." Because there's very rare moments in life where you're about to experience something for the first time, where you've never experienced it before. You kind of know what's coming, but you can't really know until you have actually experienced it. And those are very rare. And those rare moments are unbelievable.
Yeah. So I had something similar. I mean, you keep sparking all these memories. I bet about 10 years into my broadcasting career, I'm in Toronto for the playoffs. And so I'm there for an extended amount of time. And my good friend, John Shannon, invites me to this lunch. He goes, "You won't believe it, because I know you like the history of your sport. And also I like to understand some of the history of Hockey Night in Canada." And so he invited me to this lunch where there's a group of 8 or 10 gentlemen, and I'd heard their names before, but didn't really know of them and how it all worked. But they were with all the ad agencies and so on, all the people behind the scenes that had put the show together long before I had ever been a part of it. And John I think he would meet weekly with these guys. And it was cool to go and sit, and I bet I rarely said a word, but just listen to all their stories about how Hockey Night in Canada used to be made, and they'd sell the advertising. And I think they even at that point, they were selling the show to CBC. I don't even know if it was owned by the CBC. I could be wrong, but I remember hearing all these stories going, I had no idea about how behind the scenes that show went to air. And it was really fascinating. And, just to hear those guys. And like I said, I like people that like the history. Now, I don't expect people to be a historian of whatever, I don't expect a young player to be a hockey historian. I don't need to be a historian about everybody that ever worked at Hockey Night, but I do like the history, and I think that is important.
It's cool to know where you've come from, right?
Yeah,
it's an important thing. Yeah. And especially in hockey with culture and a dressing room, it's always good to understand what came before you, because NHL is such a wonderful sport in that there's a lot of history there, especially for certain teams. But even the youngest teams, I know Vegas is, and obviously Seattle coming in, but even like the Edmonton Oilers have a great history there. If you're playing in the Montreal Canadiens or the Detroit Red Wings, or, the list goes on, like there is a ton of history there, and it should just be all around you. And you should be cognizant of what you're sitting in.
Yeah, absolutely. Awareness, big word, right? And I think the NHL draft this year was something that really, I was really proud of. And I think San Jose, many teams did really cool, interesting things. There was that kid that got drafted by Calgary, and I can't remember his name, but he was at hockey practice in Minnesota, and they stopped practice. They flashed his face on the Jumbotron, and the coach came over and told him that he had been drafted by the Flames. And that was really touching and moving. But the San Jose draft choice, I think he was the 31st pick overall this year, and his mom is deaf, and I believe they're from Calgary as well. And they came out on stage and they signed that he was drafted. So cool stuff. Like, it's about the history and, what gets us emotional, and what these emotions will always tie us forever, right? It's not when you get emotional like that, when teams like San Jose, they do something like that, it feels like not only are they connecting with the kid that they drafted, but all of us, like there's a meaning in it.
I know I'm keeping us on here for too long, but I remember being in college, and we were not a wealthy team by any stretch of the imagination. We had a little tiny bit of money to go do something. And I remember putting forth like this idea, like we need to go get whatever it was, jerseys, doesn't matter. And somebody had mentioned something that I thought was such an insignificant detail. And now from that point on, when we got the insignificant detail, which was a goal horn for the arena, which was like it wasn't that expensive, but it was such a small thing, but it added atmosphere to the building. It was unbelievable how much atmosphere it added. And what you're talking about is those little details, and you don't realize how much of an impact they truly have until afterwards. And signing the pick, like that's taking care in and investing into what you're doing. And that's super cool. That's super cool.
Absolutely.
Let's try and I got three more. This is a fun one. All right, here we go. If you were asked to star in a recreation of one hockey movie, now I understand nobody wants to recreate Slapshot, but just bear with me if we could transport you back to when they made it, or any of these movies, and you got to star alongside Paul Newman or Emilio Estevez or Russell Crowe. So I'm talking Slapshot, Mystery Alaska, Mighty Ducks, Goon, Youngblood. Name another sports movie. If you want to go a different sport, you can. Which one would you take?
Oh, okay. Although I haven't watched the movie, and shame on me, I'd still like to see Miracle. And Kurt Russell plays Herb Brooks. I think that would have been fascinating. You can't escape the lore of Slapshot for sure. But the one movie that really stood out to me, a sports movie, it was, again, I was a player still. I was in San Jose, and I was guest appearing on Hockey Night again in the playoffs. I was flying home, and on the plane I watched Jerry Maguire. And that completely resonated with me. Everything about it was, whoever wrote this script, they did a ton of research, because that was back then, especially. I don't know what it's like now. That's what that industry is like. Sports and the agencies and agents and interaction with players and everything. That was so cool and so well done. That one really, really hit home.
Jerry Maguire. I did not see that coming.
Yeah. Great movie.
Show me the money.
Show me the money, right?
Okay. You're the 18-year-old today. Okay. In today's NHL. You're Patrick Marleau. You're going to go to any NHL team you want. And you got to live with one person in his house. Who you taking?
Oh boy, that's a tough question, because unfortunately for me, I have to sit back and I have to think about, well, first of all, you want to go to a team that's doing really well. But if I'm a 18-year-old, I want to live in a great city. And so I want to experience everything about that place. And so I would love to, as a young person, play for the New York Rangers and live with Henrik Lundqvist and learn about his life and what he dealt with and learn from him. In LA, for sure, it would be either Kopitar, Doughty, or Quick, and just, how they live, and the beach life there would just be phenomenal. Now, like, I know the incredible life experiences we had in LA, and I would never change it for anything, because that was living at its best, for young people and raising a young family. Other places I would definitely consider, because I always had a secret wish. I don't share this often, but I always wanted to get traded to Vancouver, because it was my favorite city. And of course, it never happened, and I could never share that story when I was playing, because how dare I? But so I think Nashville would be great, and live with a guy like Pekka Rinne or Roman Josi and see how they exist. I think most of those guys live in a little town called Franklin. And Don and I went on a tour of Franklin because there's all this Civil War history there, and it was just awesome. It was about 45 minutes, I think, from downtown, and we went on a tour. It was awesome. So my point is, as much as if I'm having that choice as a young 18-year-old, hoping I'm going to have a long career, I want life experiences as well. I want to go to a great city that's going to teach me something about myself and the world and others. And so I would most likely lean on some of those cities. Chicago, by the way, a phenomenal place.
Your final one. Mike Tyson just fought Roy Jones Jr. I don't know if you watched it. It was actually kind of entertaining. If you could call somebody out of retirement to get in the ring with you, or maybe strap on the goalie gear and go head to head. Now I've watched you tussle with Van Beesbrook when you came screaming down the ice. I as far as I know, and Kelly, maybe you can correct me, you were not the tussler. You were not Kluche. You were not beating some guys up, calling on the bench, so to speak. So if you could call out another goalie who's retired to go have a celebrity boxing match, who would you take?
Well, I would want to do it back in the day on the ice. And this might surprise some people because contrary kind of to what you were saying, I was extremely feisty. And maybe I only got into one dust up in the NHL.
I wasn't meaning you weren't feisty. I was meaning that as far as I know, you didn't have a long list of like 20 fights.
I didn't junior. And that's what I think would surprise a lot of people. Like, it was mayhem back then. I mean, it was junior in the 70s, right? So it was a free for all. And I certainly don't know how many fights I got into because it was, we all got in fights back then. But I remember when I was playing for the Islanders and Ron Hextall was making a name for himself. And I think he got in a couple of dust ups with a couple of guys. And I'm thinking, if I ever get a chance, I want to go after Hexy because I want to see if he's as tough as people say. And I'm willing to take it on the chops. But I think I thought I had some game. I thought I was tough enough. And then, the thing was, I believe it was in 4 years after, 3 or 4 years after I made the NHL, I made the 87 Canada Cup team and Hexy was on the team. And so we became good friends. And so I knew at that point, we're never going to fight down the road, but that was the one guy I always had an inkling, like, I'd like to see him go.
I tell you what, I'm going to cut that piece right there, and that is going directly to Twitter just so I can have that little chunk out there. Challenge the Grandmaster himself, Mr. Hextall. Like, if they name the toughest goalies, so to speak, on the earth, and you put them 1 to 10, Ronnie Hextall has got to be top 5, top 2. Like, the only other guy that comes to mind for me, and you would know better than me, but Ray Emery, I got to watch in his heyday, and he beat the living tar off some guys. And then I mentioned
in his own league.
Yeah. So
Emery, I think, was in his own league. He was a unique guy. I mean, we know, wasn't it Andrew Peters when he was with was he with Buffalo at the time? And Emery might have been with Ottawa. And Peters is a tough guy. Like, he was fighting the top guys in the league, and Emery wanted to go with him. And I believe it was pretty close to a draw. Or awfully close. I remember. I just remember Ray Emery is like, he's not a typical tough goalie. He's just tough.
He was a tough guy. That was fun to watch. Well, I'm not going to hold you any longer. I really appreciate you sitting down for round 2, Kelly. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I hope you've enjoyed sitting down again. It just means round 3 has to come in another 4 months. That's the way I look at it.
I like it. I'm expecting the NHL season will be concluding somewhere in middle July. They'll hand out a Stanley Cup, hopefully once again. And then you and I are on board for another great chat. I really appreciate it.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kelly.
Okay, take care, bud.
Hey, folks. Thanks again for joining us today. If you just stumbled on the show and like what you hear, please click subscribe. Remember, every Monday and Wednesday, a new guest will be sitting down to share their story. The Sean Newman Podcast is available for free on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you find your podcast fix. Until next time.